be surprised. Everybody should close their eyes or put a blindfold on. And everything will be new.
Did you say you were going to Cuba this year, or you've been?
No, I'm going to take a group in December. God willing, be my first trip to Cuba.
All right.
Go before the Castro brothers are gone and before Donald Trump becomes president. You think I'm joking?
Yeah, no, right. You're wrong.
No, I've never seen anything quite like him in my lifetime. Just so full of hate.
But as I told somebody yesterday, the remnant has been there. The remnant of hate has been there.
That's right.
We just have been kind of sugarcoated.
Well, now it's out in the open.
Yeah. They got their man.
All right, 60 seconds. You can start counting down if you want to.
Well, what we can do is, we get ready to start. Just pause for a moment of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for this day, for this is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. We thank you, oh God, for this soldier that you have sent our way in Dr. Runoko Rashidi. We thank you for the radical, liberating love of our Savior, Jesus the African, in whom we live, move, and have our being. He fought against Roman oppression, and he fought against ignorance from his own people about their own culture. And he stands as a shining example of today, that you don't change who you are because of where you are. And so now we ask for the divine spirit to be among us, to be in this soldier who will present and then give us something to hold on to hold our heads up, knowing that we are not a footnote in history, but as a people we are intricately involved in subjects of history, and that we are the ones who have bequeathed upon the world civilization itself. So we thank you for this moment at this time. In that radical revolutionary Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I don't want to take up any of his time, you know him. He has been here before, and we just thank God for him. He is gracious, and I want to present to you the eminent and esteemed Dr. Runoko Rashidi. Come on, put your hands together.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm very pleased to be here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm very, very pleased to be here on a special afternoon. One pastor has picked me up, and another pastor has invited me to come and speak, and you all have come out on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I must say, though, just about every time I've been here in the past, it's been snow and ice on the ground, so this has really been it's refreshing. And this is my last day in the area. I flew in Friday to Chicago, taught a class, visited the Art Institute of Chicago, gave a lecture last night on the south side of Chicago, and then took a group through the Orient Institute this morning. So it's been a whirlwind of experiences, and to me, the good thing about it is, or certainly one of the good things about it, is I'm now at a stage in my life where I'm doing lots of different presentations in front of lots of different audiences, ethnic groups. Last month, I spoke at a fraternity. I spoke for the U.S. Coast Guard in different kinds of churches, and I'm able to do it, I think, pretty effectively without compromising my message and without stuttering or stammering. Now, I was sitting here a few minutes ago thinking about modifying my presentation, but I'm not going to.
All right.
I'm gonna just give it to you straight and no chaser, and we'll see what happens.
All right.
I'm gonna just show you some pictures anyway, so even if you don't care what I'm saying, or even if you don't agree with what I'm saying, I think you'll like the pictures. But I try not to say anything or do anything that is offensive, but I also want to be honest. And just listening to Pastor, I realized, and it was reaffirmed, that I'm at home and I'm with family, and I'm going to act accordingly. Now, today's presentation was billed as an afternoon with Runoko Rashidi, but what we originally talked about was doing a presentation on great black women in history. We just got finished with Black History Month. You know, that short window that we had 29 days this year to talk about a glorious story. And this, I don't know who does these things, has been designated Women's History Month. So I want to combine both of those elements. And of course, I love black women. I love everybody, but I'm not going to lie to you. I love black women. I don't think you get the praise and honor that you deserve.
All right.
And as a black man, I feel honored to be able to sing your praises and talk about you in history. So that's what I'm going to do. So I guess the first question, first things first. I'm 61. Let me acknowledge my elders. Is anybody older than 61 here today? I have your permission to begin. Thank you very much. No, it's important. It's just over 61. Okay. Yeah, I know it, man. You look good, though. You wear it well. God bless you. Now, I suppose the first question would be, what makes a person great? What constitutes greatness? I think that sometimes greatness, that being great and being famous, I think are equated, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Being influential, that's another term. Wealth, I guess, is another category, but greatness to me means something else. It's easier for me to define greatness in a man, because to me, what makes a man great is the acceptance of responsibility.
All right.
I'm not sure if that same application goes for women. Maybe because I exalt women to the extent that I do, that just doesn't seem to be good enough. And when I think of great black women, I start thinking about my mother. My mother was not famous. You never read about her in a history book.
All right.
My mother didn't have even a formal education. I don't think my mother got beyond the 6th or 7th grade. My parents were the children of sharecroppers.
All right.
In Arkansas and East Texas, life was very, very hard for them. My mother and father were married on a personal note for 17 years, and it didn't work out, and my mother left. And she had to be a strong woman because she wasn't used to being independent. She never managed to, she never learned to manage. She never had a checking account.
All right.
never learned to drive a car, didn't have much of a formal education. My mother, for most of her life, was a nurse's aide and a domestic. That means cleaning up after other people.
Yes.
But we were never hungry. We were always well clothed, and perhaps the most important thing, we always felt loved.
All right.
All right.
My mother's been an ancestor for several years now. In fact, this is from her obituary. But you know, I still get emotional thinking about her.
Yes.
And in many ways, she defines greatness for me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it would be wrong of me not to start with her. Okay.
What's her name?
Pearl Moore,
Pearl Moore.
Pearlie Moore.
Okay.
All of my mothers,
Pearl.
yeah, Pearl. And all of her sisters had names like that. I have an auntie named Emerald, another auntie named Aunt Jewel, and her best friend was named Ruby. That's how that worked out. Now, this is a painting done by a brother who I believe was from the Midwest, if I'm not mistaken, from Chicago, I'm not sure, named Ernie Barnes. And you might remember that television program, Good Times.
Good
Yeah.
times. That's
And
right.
also, I don't know if this is applicable, this might be the wrong thing to say, but there was an album by Marvin Gaye.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
Ernie Barnes' paintings were used on that album.
Example.
And this is an Ernie Barnes painting, and this is called Miss America. And you can see it's not the stereotypical, I wouldn't even know if stereotypical is the right term, but the typical Miss America that we envision.
Right,
Somebody
right.
thin and tall and generally very light. Okay? I better leave it at that.
Yeah.
This was his concept. Here's a hard-working woman. Look at those muscles. And she's got 2 shopping bags. Looks like she's been working all day. Life has not been easy.
Right.
But this was his perception of Miss America, and I think that that's a good one too. And then this is a woman who became an ancestor, died about a year ago, somebody that I was also close to. Her name was Mother Tanetta Muhammad. She was the wife and the widow of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam.
Okay.
And she liked me. She would come to see me lecture in Los Angeles, and on this particular occasion, she organized a group tour to Mexico. A lot of black people are in Mexico, and they have very low self-esteem. They don't know much about their history, so she would organize groups there every year.
Okay.
And about 5 years ago, she asked me, Dr. Rashidi, would you come and lecture to these Afro-Mexicans? And here we are sitting in front of the museum in Acapulco, Mexico. One of some of her children were supposed to come to my lecture in Chicago last night, and so I wanted to put that picture up of her up there too. Now let's just go through history. All right. Now this is an example of, you know, I've lectured in, I don't know, 62 or 63 countries now, and I do a lot of presentations to a lot of different audiences, and I typically ask them, what do you think of when you think of Africa? And people give me all kind of answers, but 3 answers I always get, and I probably say this every time I come here because it's important to set the tone. Wild animals is always first, never fails. Number 2, poverty, and number 3, disease. You remember a couple years ago, we were all gonna die from Ebola. All of us. It was the end of the world coming. Don't go to Africa. Don't let those Africans come here. It was in the news all day. And now, you don't even hear about it anymore. I suspect that a lot of it was an election ploy to embarrass Barack Obama. I found it amazing, but not unsurprising, that I clicked on the news last night and Marco Rubio was saying that the problems with the Donald Trump rallies while these people are fighting is Barack Obama's fault.
Right.
Everything is Barack Obama's fault. And the Ebola virus apparently was his fault too, if you listen to these right-wing news stations. But in other words, I'm saying that we are taught to have a negative impression of Africa.
Right.
And since we come from Africa, all of us, whether you like it or not, black, white, brown, there's only one mother continent, and that's Africa. We need to get comfortable with Africa. And the best way to do that is to find out some factual stuff. So I talk about that a lot. And here's an African scientist, hardly nobody associates Africa with science, and holding up the remains of an ancient African woman called Dinknesh, which means you are wonderful. The world knows these bones as Lucy. Perhaps you've heard of them, and they're 3.4 million years old. And of course, I need to spend some time with Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. It's always been in Africa. I've been to Egypt 22 times, it's been in Africa every single time. I have to remind people of that. It's not in the Near East or the Middle East, and the people who built Egyptian civilization were African too. Now, I don't know if you've seen this travesty of a movie of gods and kings or
Right,
whatever it is.
right.
And these movies that they're making now, although the director and the producer always apologizes for lack of diversity, they keep doing the same thing.
Keep doing it.
In these films now, you don't even have black people as servants.
Right.
When I was coming up watching Cleopatra and stuff, at least you had black people as slaves in Egypt. Now you don't even have that. Now the world's first scientist that we know of is a man named Imhotep. One of the problems I have with African American History Month or Black History Month is we start with slavery and we limit it to the United States. So we spend generally a whole month talking about great African American heroes and sheroes, as if we only live in the United States and our history started with Chicken George. So we need to destroy that. Now the greatest, the most distinguished African, I think, from before slavery is a man you may or may not have heard of, and his name is Imhotep. Have you heard of Imhotep?
Yes.
Now the Imhotep you may have heard of is in the Mummy movies.
Right.
That's a myth.
Right.
Imhotep is the world's first scientist. He is a man of letters. He's a prime minister and a magician and an astronomer and an architect, and he's the father of medicine. Now the images of Imhotep that we have, for the most part, are small little statues because they were put in tombs, they were put in graves. And it's hard to really distinguish his features. But this is Imhotep's mother. And looking at this, it leaves no doubt as to the racial origins or the ethnicity of who Imhotep lived, or who Imhotep was, and he lived about 5,000 years ago. So we'll just go through these quickly. This is a woman from the Pyramid Age in Egypt, and this is what I really like. I love to see a black man and a black woman together. I cannot apologize for that. I think that the family structure is the key, okay? And it doesn't help to run away from each other. I know it's difficult. I've been through 2 divorces, but I'm ready for a third. Okay? Keep hope alive, the audacity of hope. And here you see from the Pyramid Age, a sister and a brother together, a man and a woman together. You don't find this in Greco-Roman art. In fact, in the art of Greece and Rome, you never see a man and a woman together. Now, the greatest of the Greek philosophers is a man named Plato. And from Plato, we get the concept of a platonic relationship. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but typically when people talk about a platonic relationship, they're talking about a non-intimate relationship.
Right.
Numerous sisters have said, Runoko, I like you, but I don't really want to get too deep. I don't want to get too heavy. Let's just have a platonic relationship, meaning let's just be friends. But for Plato, the ideal relationship was between an older man and a young boy. Plato thought that a relationship between a man and a woman was a form of insanity. He thought if a man and woman got together, they must be crazy, something must be wrong. And so that comes out of the Greek world. But in the African world, this is what you find. I love the concept of that. And I think that, to me, it's something that we need to see. And there I am in the Boston Museum talking about that. I like that little young brother there looking up. I mean, if we could reach our children, we'd be in much better shape. And here's one. This is an Egyptian woman with her son. And you can see, in a sense, she is the throne. This is almost 5,000 years ago. This boy became the king of Egypt when he was 10 years old, and he died on the throne at the age of 104. The worst thing you could do in ancient Egypt in terms of etiquette was disrespect your mother. It was unthinkable. In ancient Egypt, women were truly liberated. They could will and inherit fortunes. They could bring suits to the courts of law. In the ancient world of Greece and Rome, women were essentially slaves. They were the property of their husbands. They didn't use the B word back then. In fact, I would say the only time a B word should be used in terms of a black woman is beautiful and brilliant. And the N word, they didn't use that either, and we shouldn't use it. I hear a lot of young people justify the use of these terms as though it's something positive. We should never accept that kind of terminology. And what drives it is the media.
Right.
All right. So this is, to me, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful piece, and also an exquisite piece of art. I was going to say one other thing about women in ancient Egypt. No record whatsoever of domestic violence. No record of rape, no record of sexual assault in thousands of years of history. So women were highly respected, and these were very moral people. Can I get you all to come on this side, please? Everybody should be on this side. I know it's very tempting to see all these empty seats, but otherwise you'll be looking at the back of my head, which is not a bad thing, but I like to be able to see you when I do the presentation.
Well, there's seats over here.
Brother Kwabina, Hotep, my brother, how you doing?
The slide that you just had up, who did that sculpture?
We don't know the name of the artist in most cases. Very, very rarely do we know the names of the people who actually were the artists of these magnificent images. This is in the Brooklyn Museum. Can I get some water, please? Any kind of water, any kind of liquid at all. California is a drought, so we have to preserve our water, but I don't know if that's the case here. All right, good question. Now here's an interesting one, and this one is mostly a matter of class and symbolism. Now the people of Egypt were black people, right? There's no question about that. They were Africans. But there was also color symbolism. Now in ancient Egypt, black was considered the color of God. It was considered the color of divinity. For some people, some of us, it still is. But when you see a person painted black, you mean that means that they were particularly significant in their lives. That it's not just an ethnic thing. And I'm going to show you several examples of that. Typically, the women were painted much lighter. Not necessarily that's what they looked like. But the lighter you were in the art, it meant that the higher born you were. You didn't work out in the field. You weren't in the sun. So there's symbolism there. Many people have interpreted this in an ethnic sense, and I don't think that's accurate. Now this is a better example. This woman's name is Amos Nefertari, and she's one of the most beloved figures in world history. She lived about 3,600 years ago. Here she is with her husband, and you can see she's the one painted black. And that means she was even more significant than he was. Okay? That's what that represents. Now, she outlived her husband and became very important in the life and reign of her son and her grandson. Her name is Amos Nefertari, and then here you can see her again right here. Look at the beautiful colors that have somehow survived for thousands of years. And here is her body unwrapped. You know what? They went to great lengths to preserve the body. Cremation was not something that was used. They would never destroy the body unless you had really, really done something terrible. Thank you, sir. And so we have a pretty good idea as to what these people look like. She was a very small, petite woman with thinning hair and buck teeth. And you can see the extensions there, just like today, except she didn't get it from the Asians down on the corner. But they did put extensions in their hair. I don't mean any offense. I better leave the hair thing alone, because I do want to get invited back again.
Where did they get hair from?
That's the natural hair.
Natural hair. I don't
But you
know.
said extensions, so
Yeah.
that didn't grow out of their hair. No,
That's a
you
very,
said
very good
that
question.
Back in those days.
I never
it was
thought about it
extensions.
before.
So it must
I don't know if it was an industry or what.
from their slaves or.
No, not necessarily from slaves. It could have been an economic thing. Even today, people get their hair, these weaves. They're not coming from slaves. People
Right.
sell their hair
Right,
for
right,
economic reasons.
right, okay.
So perhaps something like that. I never thought about it. That's an excellent question. In fact, what I'd like to do, if I get a moment or two, I'm going to show you a new pictures, a couple new pictures I bought. I mean, not bought, but I have. I got in a museum in Italy, a city called Bologna, and they're actual extensions, hair extensions from ancient Egypt. You can see the actual ones. Now the man right here, that's a man in the background, his name is Cinnamut, and he's the nurse and teacher and steward of the young girl that you see popping out of this sculpture. Her name is Nefertari, and she's the daughter of this woman right here, whose name is Makare Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is the most powerful of the pharaohs of Egypt, the most powerful of the female pharaohs of Egypt. And I'm going to say something, It may not be politically correct, but the idea of the Pharaoh being a wicked person is a myth. Just the opposite of that. In fact, the Pharaoh was the personification of the good shepherd. So the idea that the Pharaoh was a wicked human being is not historically accurate. This is a woman named Hatshepsut. She's Pharaoh of Egypt for about 20 years. Now the line of descent was run through the female side of the family. In order for the king to be considered legitimate, you had to marry the female in whom the royal bloodline ran. So this is very, very important. This image right here is from a temple dedicated to Hatshepsut, and this is a queen from a place called Punt. And you can see that's the figure and shape of a black woman right there. Now, I've been in Egypt many times and been in places where you have tour guides talking about this piece, and they're saying that the reason she looked like that is she had a disease. You know, Egypt, if you can sit on this side, please. Egypt is, the people of Egypt today are not the original people. The official name for Egypt is the United Arab Republic. And it never fails, if I go to Egypt, somebody will ask me, well, Dr. Rashidi, since you're in Egypt, you might as well go to Africa. The people in Egypt today are invaders, and they don't see themselves as being connected to Africa. And the tour guides have a non-African perspective when they present the information. All right. You can see that's a black woman right there for sure. Another image of Hatshepsut in the form of what we call a sphinx. And then this is a powerful woman too. Her name is Queen Tiye, T-I-Y-E. She is the mother of a man named Akhenaten, who is credited with having written the book of Psalms by some people. And she is the wife of a man named Amenhotep the Magnificent. And she's the grandmother of Tutankhamun, or King Tut. And she is the mother-in-law of Nefertiti. And this is just a fragment of the bottom of her face. This one is in a museum in London, but this is the classic picture of Queen Tiye that we typically get. This is what people in ancient Egypt, women in ancient Egypt look like. But you won't see this one on TV. You certainly won't see it in the movies. This is not a slave. This is one of the most powerful women that ever lived, and she's a typical Egyptian. And her name is Queen Tiye. This is a small piece that would actually fit in your hand. It's in a museum in Berlin. It's made of wood, and it's 3,400 years old. Now, this is a family portrait, I guess you might say. And here's that queen with her husband and one of the children down below. Actually, if we had a fuller image, you'd see 3 of the children down below. It's truly a family portrait. These statues are 60 feet tall. And the greatest Egyptian museum in the world is in Cairo. It's the Egyptian Museum, and this is the first thing you see when you walk in. 2 60-feet statues of a black man and a black woman, a family that dominates the Egyptian Museum. Again, you will not see this in the art of Greece or Rome. You'll see a man by himself or a woman by himself, or you might see a man with a dog or something, or an older man with a young boy. But the idea of the couple being the ideal social unit was foreign to Egypt. I mean, foreign to Greece and Rome. As a matter of fact, there were times in Greek history where you actually had to have laws enforced saying a man should have sex with his wife because the birth rates were falling, because the men wanted to be with other men. Yeah, it's a true story. And not only that, they lived happy and content to be with each other. Now, in the United States, we are told behind every great man there's a woman. But in ancient Egypt and ancient Africa, next to every great man was a woman. The woman did not take a subordinate role. And sometimes even in front of the man was an even greater woman. And the man was so secure in his masculinity, he was not intimidated by that. To me, a secure man should not be afraid to see his woman rise to high positions.
Right.
You know, he should be willing, it seems to me, to stand behind her at least sometimes. All right. I think I better go for this part real quick, because I don't want to make y'all too nervous. Another image of her. Now, who do you think this is? This is Nefertiti. Now, this is the one you typically used to see. And many of us think that this is a forgery or a fake. It was found in an artist's workshop. At best, it was never finished. But other than Cleopatra, who we're going to get to in a moment, this is the epitome of feminine beauty from the ancient Egyptian world that is projected to the world at large. I see sisters, hardcore sisters in the hood, with a pendant of Nefertiti like this on there. Okay. Now, this is in Germany now. It's been in Germany for over 100 years, and the Germans call this the beauty of Berlin.
Wow.
And there's a special room in an Egyptian museum just for this piece. It's the only piece in the museum where you're not allowed to take pictures. That's how valuable the Germans think this is. They actually have 5 armed guards with guns in the room to make sure you don't take any pictures and that you don't touch it and any of that stuff. But the actual Nefertiti probably looked like this right here. This is what scientists say she would have looked like. And to me, that's a pretty fine woman right there. I'd take her out anytime. Yeah. And this is one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. This woman's name is Queen Tuya, and she's the wife of a king named Seti I, and the mother, I give up, okay. The mother, I just want to be able to face everybody. It just seems rude to me. I'm gonna give you a pass, okay? But it seems rude to me to have people behind me when I'm talking. I think I would be rude, not the people who would be sitting there. She's the wife of a king named Seti I and the mother of a king named Ramses the Great. Okay. This is the principal wife of Ramses the Great, and this is another woman named Nefertari. And here she is again, and then this is the famous image of Nefertari. This is in a tomb in a place called the Valley of the Queens. And it's very hard to get in there. For the most part, it's locked up. I'm told if you pay $10,000, you can bribe your way in there. I've been fortunate enough to have gone in there twice. No, I didn't pay $10,000. It just happened to be open at that particular time. I think it's been touched up a little bit too. I suspect that the actual painting would have been darker than that. And this is just a beautiful piece right here. They are not a king and a queen. They're just a high-born Egyptian couple. And I like that. I like the tenderness. I like the way she's holding him. I like the compassion, all of that. This is an example of another woman who has died, and the mummy been unwrapped and photographed. And there's a kind of a look of pain, almost horror, on her face. One thing is for sure, when they buried these folk and sealed the tomb, they didn't mean for people to be going in there messing around. And I think that they would be pretty upset at the way these tombs are being excavated today. But the valuable thing is the information that we learn from excavating these tombs.
Okay.
When I go into a tomb and I take a group down there, I always tell people, remember, somebody was buried in here. And so go into it with respect. But look at those hair extensions. Okay? Look at the brown skin. I'm sure those eyes have been inlaid. I'm sure those are not her original eyes. And then this is a powerful woman named Amenirtis. And she was the governess of the most powerful city in the world, a city called Waset or Thebes. Now it's known as Luxor. Luxor is my favorite city in Egypt because 80% of all the monuments of ancient Egypt are there. And she was by far the most powerful woman on earth. She lived about 2,700 years ago. She's the auntie of a man named Taharka, who's actually mentioned in the Old Testament, I think, on 3 occasions. He actually went and rescued Jerusalem. And this is Cleopatra the 7th. Now there are at least seven women with the name Cleopatra. This is the most famous one. And this is a bust of her in the Louvre Museum in Paris. A colleague of mine at the University of Cambridge found this piece in the basement in Paris and identified it as Cleopatra. And this same woman is revealed that Cleopatra's mother was an African woman. Now, this does not look like Elizabeth Taylor by any stretch of the imagination. She had what today would be called locks. And also, based on what history tells us, she was not particularly beautiful, but she was very intelligent. And she was very patriotic. One tradition says she spoke 17 languages. That's pretty serious. Most of us aren't prepared to speak any language other than English. Sometimes people say, Dr. Rashid, you travel all the time, you must speak many languages. I say, I speak a little bit of English, and that's about it. So this is Cleopatra. Now these are queens from other parts of the Nile Valley, from a place called Meroe. And these are the queen mothers right here. These are from south of Egypt, in a place called Nubia. Perhaps you've heard of Nubia. And then we go to West Africa, and this is in more modern times. Now, one of the things that I hear from African Americans all the time is, I really don't want to hear about Africa because those Africans sold us into slavery. How many of you have heard that?
Oh, yeah.
I won't ask how many believe that. I'll just how many of you have heard that. Now, if you ask a person, how do you know that?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I heard it. Somebody told me.
Right.
They said on YouTube. It's just common sense. Why are we prepared to believe the worst in ourselves without any investigation?
Right.
You just heard, and you've been indoctrinated with that. But how do you know that? What book did you read? What source are you quoting from? And this is very, very profound.
Right.
So if you believe that Africans sold us, and you're prepared to talk about that, are you not equally prepared to talk about those Africans who you know fought against slavery?
Right. Right.
Now this is well documented.
Right.
Africans attacked those dungeons where the captives were held. They mutinied on the ships.
That's right.
They, of course, we know about people, at least we should know about people like Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman or what have you. So if we're prepared to talk about Africans who we believe sold other Africans, it seems to me we should at least be equally prepared to talk about people who we know fought against that evil institution.
Right.
And this is one of those people, an African woman named Nzinga from a country called Angola.
Right.
And she fought the Portuguese for the last 40, 50 years of her life. And she was a Christian. And here's a famous incident in the life of Queen Nzinga right here, where she was supposed to have a meeting with the Portuguese, who were the invaders of Central Africa at that time. And the Portuguese got to the meeting place early and decided to put this black woman in her place. And they came and took all the chairs and removed all the extra seats, so that when Nzinga came with her delegation, there would be no place for her to sit, and they would be forced to stand in the presence of these Europeans, which according to the Portuguese would have given them a psychological edge. Now, these Africans weren't stupid.
Right.
So they go in the room, they see immediately what's happening, and one of her attendants bends over and becomes Nzinga's throne.
Right.
They wanted her to be able to keep her dignity.
Right.
Dignity is a very important thing. And here's another one of Nzinga. This is a lithograph of her. She lived in the 15 and 1600s. She lived to be almost 90. And this is a famous drawing of her, what's called a lithograph, done by a Frenchman in 1820. It's a beautiful piece, but I rather doubt if in the 1600s they had Jerry curls in Central Africa. This is another famous African woman named Asa G, and she lived in Ghana, and she organized a war against the British. Now this is another time when Africans resisted colonization. The people of Ghana, particularly a group called the Asante, fought at least 3 wars against the British. In one of the wars, they were defeated, and their king was taken away, called the Asantehene, and the symbol of Asante rulership was taken away too. It's called the Golden Stool.
Right,
The British
right.
took it. And the Africans were ashamed, but they weren't going to do anything about it. So she made a famous speech,
That's right.
and she said, well, if the men won't fight the British, the women will.
Yep.
That's right.
You go home and we will pick up the spear and we will fight.
That's right.
And she shamed the brothers into going to war. Unfortunately, Asante lost the war, and Asante herself was in prison. She is a heroic African woman. And here's one of my great teachers, Dr. Asa Hilliard.
Yep.
On my only trip to Africa with him in Ghana in 2004, and he's with one of the descendants of Yah Sanchiwa. And here's a modern African woman that I have a lot of respect for. This is Winnie Mandela of South Africa. In fact, I have more respect for her than her husband, Nelson Mandela. Now, these are new photographs, and these images right here are from Ethiopia. I was in Ethiopia last May. It was my second trip there. You know, I do group tours. I would love to travel with you all at some point in time. And Ethiopia also, interestingly enough, is perhaps the oldest Christian nation in the world.
Right.
Christianity has been practiced in Ethiopia for nearly 2,000 years. And this is a girl in the north. A lot of us, when we think of Ethiopians, we think of the lighter complexion people called the Amhara. But they are a minority in Ethiopia. So she's Beta Israel. She's actually Jewish. And these are children in the south. I took about 500 of these pictures. Beautiful children in what is called the Omo Valley in southern Ethiopia. And they put ochre in their hair. I spent about a week with these folks. What's called ochre. And that gives it the reddish hue. She's from a community called the Hamar. I had a lot of fun with them. I laughed with them, joked with them, and sometimes it got very tense because you have to pay them to take their pictures. And they don't play. That means if you take a bad picture, you still gotta pay. The moment your finger starts to go down towards the shutter button on the camera, you're supposed to give it up. And you know how we are, some people try to sneak and that kind of thing. They weren't joking. They would surround the car, and you were not gonna leave until you gave it up. Now, here I am in Central Africa at the border of Congo and Uganda.
Wow.
And these poor impoverished people here are called the Batwa. And the Batwa are the same as the people we call pygmies. And the woman on the end, believe it or not, is the queen of the Batwa. And you can see they've fallen on very hard times. Now let's quickly go around the world. Anybody have an idea where she's from? She's not from Gary, we can eliminate that. She's from the Philippines.
Wow.
And this is the last, or the last full blood, the most famous of the people from the country called Tasmania. From Australia, and myself in Australia in 2008 were two of the founding members of the Aboriginal Australian Black Panther Party.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't until January 1967 that black people in Australia were considered humans by the government.
Right.
Up to that point, they were officially classified as plants and animals, if you can believe that. They had freedom rides, they had sit-ins, there was a branch of the Garvey movement there, they had Black Panthers there. And their struggle coincides with our struggle. And at the last presentation I gave in Australia, no, not the last one, but the last one in 2008, they honored me by coming out. This is the 50th anniversary of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in the United States. With Aboriginal Australians, and this is an Aboriginal Australian. These are the original people of Australia. And I met her at a place called Palm Island, and I'm an anthropologist and a historian, so I asked her how old she was, and she said, I don't know. That their lives have been so regulated by the British that some of them don't even know when they were born. Some of them were literally forced to wear dog tags. They're treated horribly there. High, massive rates of incarceration, high unemployment, poor standards of health, et cetera, et cetera. And where I am now, taking this picture, is a place called Palm Island, and this is where the most rebellious of the Aboriginal Tasmanians were put against their will, and then their children were taken from them. This sister was about, I mean, the picture doesn't do it justice, but this sister is about as black as anybody I've ever met. She worked as a travel agent in a place called Buka Island. And I saw her and I couldn't take my eyes off that sister. And these people had the nerve to tell me on my last day in Buka Island, they said, we can take you places where people are 10 times darker than we are. And I said, wow, and you waited till the last day? Because that's exactly where I would have wanted to start the tour. From a place called East New Britain. deep in the South Pacific. Now these people are natural blondes.
Mm.
You know, black people were the first blondes.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, the first blondes.
Mhm.
The first redheads. Before she let me take her picture, she wanted to know if I was going to vote for Barack Obama. This is deep in the South Pacific. From Fiji and a place called Vanuatu, deep in the South Pacific. I took this picture just about a year ago on the afternoon of the evening where you had the fourth largest storm ever to hit land. You had a cyclone there, what we would call a hurricane, 175-mile-per-hour winds.
Wow.
And I took this picture that day. Look at that beautiful head of hair. Briefly, let's look at the image of African women in Europe. These are the black Madonnas right here. And you can see the kind of people who visit them. And the black Madonna is believed to be, it's a black depiction of the Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus. And because they're black, it is thought in Catholicism and in the Eastern Orthodox churches of Europe that they're able to perform miracles. And they treat them like living, breathing entities. They change their clothes, they give them fresh jewels, and it looks to me like little Jesus has really been working out. Look at that arm. I wish I looked like that. This one is literally the Queen of Poland. This is the national symbol of Poland, a black Madonna child. This one is in Luxembourg. And this is one I just recently photographed in Prague in the Czech Republic. This was, I think, in September of last year. And that's where it is. You can see the statue atop that newsstand. People have restaurants nearby. This one is in Belgium. Here's one from Greek mythology. This is a woman called Andromeda. According to the Greeks, Andromeda was an Ethiopian princess, a black princess, who married their hero, Perseus. Perseus is the Greek hero who slew the Medusa. So it might be interesting to know, in my opinion it's interesting to know, just in terms of self-esteem, that the Andromeda galaxy, the largest galaxy in the solar system, is named after a black woman. This one is from an ancient civilization, Italy, called the Etruscan civilization. This is called the Venus of Willendorf. This is a statuette from ancient Europe, 25,000 years old. A cameo from ancient Italy. This right here, the black woman there, is the mother of Alejandro de Medici. Alejandro de Medici was the first head of state in the modern Western world. He was the Duke of Florence 500 years ago, and that's his mother. These bones are these are called the Ivory Bangle Lady. And this is about 1,500 years old. These are the skeletal remains of a wealthy black woman who lived in northern England 1,500 years ago. And they found ivory bangles in her tomb, so she's known as the Ivory Bangle Lady. Another cameo from Italy, now in a museum in Austria. This one is called Moses and his Ethiopian wife. This one I photographed in a museum in Antwerp, Belgium. It's 500 years old. And this is just the image of the black woman in the art of Europe. This one is so lifelike, it looks almost like she could start a conversation. Now this one I photographed in Minnesota, but there's another one very similar to it in Baltimore, but there's another one almost identical to it in the Art Institute of Chicago. I saw it yesterday. And tell me if that doesn't look like Lauryn Hill.
Yeah.
This is from another French sculptor. Very, very lifelike. These are in Europe. This one is a model of a woman named Saartjie Baartman, who was taken from South Africa about 300 years ago and put on display in Europe. People made fun of her. They made fun of her behind, her hips. When she died, her body parts were removed and put on display. And they were just reburied in South Africa about 20 years ago.
Right.
Under the auspices of Nelson Mandela. And I don't know if this is a photograph of her or a reconstruction of her, but she is from the group that Europeans like to poke fun at and call Hottentots. They're called Namakoi in Southern Africa. I've had a chance to spend time with them. Women are very powerful in their community, And it's been suggested that this is where the fashion thing called the bustle came from. This is just, these images are from Russia. This is an image of a woman who has been martyred, a Christian woman who was martyred for her faith. This is the top Westminster Abbey Cathedral in London. This is the reconstruction of that ivory bangle lady. This is a woman who reputed to have had African ancestry. Her name is Queen Charlotte Sophia. She was a queen of England at the time of the American Revolution. She's an ancestor of Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth. So if you believe in the one drop rule, you figure it out. Another painting of a black woman in early England from a coat of arms in England. This is a little girl that Queen Victoria adopted, and the sister, as she's grown up, her name is Sarah Bonetta Forbes. She was from West Africa, an adopted child of Queen Victoria of England. Here's another kind of image of a black child in Europe, and this little girl was actually put in a zoo by Europeans, and this practice still goes on today, believe it or not. Human zoos. And Africans in Europe protest, naturally, the indignity of that. This is a cabinet minister in Italy. And here she is again. She's been subjected to many racist taunts. She's from Congo. People have thrown bananas at her, made chirping sounds, calling her a monkey. So what happens to Barack Obama is not an isolated phenomenon. You may remember when somebody said, "You lie!"
Right.
When he was giving the State of the Union address. No American president has ever been treated like that.
Right.
And you can't rule out race. And here I am with my daughter. And there she is again, sitting on the lap of one of the daughters of Malcolm X, looking as disinterested as any human being could possibly be. These sisters are in the Netherlands. And finally, let me just finish with the Americas. This is a reconstruction of the skull of a person named Lucia. And Lucia lived perhaps 30,000 years ago. And she is, according to fossil remains, this is what the first human being in the Western Hemisphere looked like. So our history, even in the Americas, doesn't start with slavery. We are the original people, whether we like it or not. This is an artist's depiction of a woman named Califia. And according to Spanish tradition, this is who the state of California was named after. According to Spanish tradition, in a novel published in Toledo in Spain in 1516, California was a place populated by wealthy black women, wealthy with gold. An image of an African saint that I photographed in Peru. And these are black folk in parts of the Americas we may not be familiar with. This woman is a queen in Bolivia. And this is just an image that was, well, anyway. This is one of the regents in New York City. Her name is Adelaide Sanford. And she was a regent for the state of New York in the field of education. She just had her 90th birthday. A brilliant educator in New York. And when she addresses you, she always says, "My beloveds." And she says it like she really means it, like she's not just mouthing the words. Here's a woman I found out about on a recent visit to the island of Martinique in the Caribbean. Her name is Lumina Sophie. She was known to the French as Surprise. And she was a freedom fighter. And, you know, slavery was not just, people didn't just lay over. You know, they fought against that. And so here are some of the women who fought against that. Here's another one in Canada. Her name is Marie Angelique. Now, she was very rebellious, and she tried to burn the whole city of Montreal to the ground. I want you to hear that. She didn't attempt to burn a building or a block or a neighborhood. She tried to burn the whole city up. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, she didn't get that far, and the French put a noose around her neck. Here's a woman named Carmen Amelia Robles, and she fought under Zapata in the Mexican Revolution. This is a statue I found in Suriname, a Dutch colony in South America, and her name is Alida. Now, one of the problems with enslavement, one of the many, many, many problems, is the sexual exploitation of black women, of enslaved women. And there was a time when the black man could not protect the black woman. Now, this was a beautiful woman, according to the story, and her owner or master was checking her out. And the owner's wife wasn't stupid. She got a hint as to what was going on. So One day, the slave owner, the master, goes into the field, and he comes back, and the wife's owner says, "Look, I got something for you. I cooked your favorite meal. It's in a pot on the stove." And he went in there and looked, and apparently she had cut off the enslaved woman's breast, one of her breasts, and put it in the pot. He was boiling it. Now, the woman somehow survived that and ran into the bush and bore 3 sons eventually.
Wow.
And they became the greatest freedom fighters in the history of Suriname. The principal one is named Bony, B-O-N-Y. And so the Dutch called his followers Bony Niggers. And he became the greatest resistance leader in the history of Suriname.
Wow.
There are many examples like that. Here's a woman named Sally Bassett. This is in Bermuda, Hamilton, Bermuda. And she was burned at the stake by the British in the 1600s. She was accused of giving poison to the other enslaved Africans. She denied it, but the British burned her anyway to set an example. And of course, Rosa Parks, you don't even have to say much about her, but there were other women who preceded Rosa Parks who did very, very similar things, but she was the one that became famous, Rosa Parks. And this is Harriet Tubman, a conductor on the Underground Railroad, who was famous for saying, "I rescued hundreds of my people from slavery, and I could have rescued hundreds more if only they had known that they were slaves."
Right.
She led troops in the Civil War. She actually led troops into battle. Harriet Tubman. And this is a similar version of Harriet Tubman in Jamaica, Nanny of the Jamaican Maroons. Here's a freedom fighter in the United States and Mississippi named Fannie Lou Hamer, who was famous for saying, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And on the other side is Ella Baker, who was in the NAACP and an activist. And way on the top is Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture. Famous photo. I bet Brother Kwame now can tell us about this picture. Here's a woman, and her name, I seem to be having a mental block with this sister. She is from a place called Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, and she was also a freedom fighter. She fought alongside this at the same time as the Haitian Revolution, and she was captured by the French when she was pregnant, and the French hung her the day the baby was born. I spent a lot of time in France, and we're trying to find out what happened to that baby. This is Asada Shakur, our sister now, a refugee, I suppose you might say, in Cuba. And I'm hoping that the Cubans don't give her up as a part of some sort of treaty with the United States. She was accused of killing a state trooper in New Jersey. Now, this is an aviatrix named Bessie Coleman, and I like her a lot. She could fly, but she had to go to France to learn that and get a license, and she died in a plane crash. This woman's name is Camille Yarborough. She wrote a famous book, or I don't know how famous it was, a book called Criminalizing a Race. The older woman here is named Baina Bello, and she's from Haiti, and she's an authority on African women in the Haitian Revolution. And the younger sister is just a sister I was sweet on. Nothing ever came out of it, unfortunately. This is a black historian and journalist. Her name is Drusilla Dungy Houston. She wrote a history book called The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire, and she also, in 1921, covered the destruction of Black Wall Street. You know about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, a city that was actually bombed from the sky. It was bombed from the sky. It was a prosperous black community that inspired, the rage of the local white folks in Oklahoma, and they rented a plane and got bombs and flew over it and bombed the community. It's the only, until the thing called MOVE, the group called MOVE was bombed in Philadelphia. It's the only city that I'm aware of in the United States has been bombed from the sky. And it was a black community. And there were many Black Wall Streets all over the United States. And this is Sojourner Truth, who learned to speak Dutch before she learned to speak English. She was born in Michigan. I believe she was born in Michigan. And the Dutch were dominant in Michigan at that time. She was an activist and an abolitionist. And when European white women suffragettes were struggling to get the right to vote, she said, "Well, ain't I a woman?"
That's right.
Now, how many of you have heard of John Brown?
Yeah.
John Brown launched the raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia in 1859 to free the slaves.
Right.
I respect that. I don't know how he felt about black folk, but he felt that slavery was an abomination and was willing to die for that. You can't ask any more than that. I respect it. I salute that. But this was the woman who financed it. According to the story, she gave John Brown a phenomenal amount of money in 1859, a sum of $30,000 in 1859. I wish somebody would give me 30 grand today. I'd accept a lot less than that, as a matter of fact. Her name is Mary Ellen Pleasant. And this is kind of like a lot of us. You know, I ain't gonna say nothing, but we kind of dozed off, and every now and then we wake up as a people. This is Claudia Jones. She's an activist from Trinidad, a woman named Queen Mother Moore, a Garveyite, and a reparations activist. This woman's name is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing.
Yep.
And she is a famous psychiatrist who dealt with theories about how racism developed in the concept of white supremacy, which is really not a concept, it's a reality. And then some of the artists and musicians. For example, this is the great Ella Fitzgerald.
Yep.
And this is Celia Cruz from Cuba.
Yeah.
And this is great Nina Simone. There's a lot of controversy about a new movie that's coming out and who was picked to portray Nina Simone. But that sister could sing, and she had a story. I actually met her. And she has songs like To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. And a song called I Wish I Knew How It Feel to Be Free. She didn't write that song, but she became famous for singing it. These became the kind of anthems of the civil rights and black power movements. And another song on an altogether different note, My Baby Loves Nobody But Me, or something like that. You know that song? I know y'all do, but you probably shouldn't say it.
Mississippi got
Yeah, that too. This is Elizabeth Catlett, a sculpturist who spent the last years of her life in Mexico. And Billie Holiday.
Yeah.
Now she was a deep sister. Okay? A lot of us don't know a lot about Billie Holiday, but if you just listen to some of her songs, and not just Strange Fruit, which is about lynchings, but also she has a very poignant song that she sang, written by George Gershwin, called I Love You, Porgy. You ever heard the lyrics of that song? It's a very powerful song. And here she is with a piece of African art, or from the stage play Porgy and Bess, or Porgy and Bess. Mahalia Jackson. I mean, maybe the greatest gospel singer we produced. And my favorite song by her, which I listen to periodically, I grew up in the church. You know, I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, and people would dance and speak in tongues and shout, and we spend more time in church, I thought, than we did at home. I thought I lived in the church. This sister has a song called How I Made It Over. Have you ever heard that too? Oh, it's like she goes into a trance. How I Made It Over. Maybe I should have had a musical career. And Phyllis Hyman. You know, committed suicide. Ah, beautiful voice. Oh, well, we don't get into her songs, man, but she had quite a few. I don't know if that would be appropriate. This is Miriam Makeba. And Stokely Carmichael became Kwame Ture. Yeah, she's from South Africa. And Whitney Houston, another sister with a voice.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, we left us too soon. There's a whole list, isn't there? And Ruby Dee, who I always admired, and her significant other, Ozzie Davis. And Bessie Smith, the Empress of the Blues, who I started to say she spent a lot of time in Chicago, but she lived in New York. And she has a lot of songs too. She's the Empress of the Blues. She has a song called Give Me anyway, let's just leave Bessie alone. And here's a funny one. There's Cicely Tyson and Queen Elizabeth. They're the same age. Can you believe that?
Wow. Enough said. Black don't crack.
Cicely. Yeah, autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. You remember that film? I was never able to watch that film. Too much for me. I think it was based on an actual
It's
story.
based on- yeah.
This is the playwright Lorraine Hansberry who wrote Raisin in the Sun.
Right.
This is a woman named Pauline Elizabeth Hopkins. Towards the beginning of the 20th century, she was a playwright and a stenographer and an actress and a musician and a historian. And this is Zora Neale Hurston,
Yep.
Yeah.
an early anthropologist. This is an educator named Anna Julia Cooper,
Yep.
who lived to be about 100. She got her PhD from the Sorbonne when she was 67 years old.
That's awesome.
And one of her contemporaries named Nanny Helen
That's
Burroughs.
right.
And she was a Baptist sister and also an educator, and she believed in the 3 B's for black women: the bath, the broom, and the Bible. She believed that if you mastered the bath, the broom, and the Bible, you were guaranteed to have success in life. And in 1905, she delivered an impassioned speech before the National Baptist Convention in Virginia called "How the Sisters Are Hindered from Helping."
That's right.
She resented how black women were pushed in the background.
Right.
And she was basically saying, look, we've got something to offer too.
Right.
Anyway, Nanny Helen Burroughs. And another great educator, this is Mary McLeod Bethune, founder of Bethune-Cookman College
Yeah.
in Florida.
Yeah.
Septima Clarke,
Oh, yeah.
That's my car.
an educator in South Carolina, civil rights activist. Mary Ann Shadd, who was the first woman to publish a newspaper in North America. Not the first black woman, the first woman to publish a newspaper in North America. Of course, she had to go to Canada to do it. This one is just, has some significance. This is, I found this painting in Ecuador. It's in actually in a museum in Spain. And it's a woman with a black woman, a servant, and that's the mistress of a hacienda in South America during slavery days. And to me, that sister has a look on her face like, darn it, I didn't put enough arsenic in this melon because this And another sister defending herself. You can see a bit of a knife at the very top. And I guess she's telling this guy, I got something for you. It's not what you like. This is Amy Ashwood Garvey and Amy Jakes Garvey. These were the 2 successive wives of the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And Coretta Scott King and Betty Shabazz. We talk about Dr. King and we talk about Malcolm, but a lot of times we don't talk about the women in their lives who helped sustain them. This is Ida B. Wells, known as a crusader for justice. She was a teacher and a journalist and a public speaker. She was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1862, in July 1862. And among other, a little bitty woman, among other things, she would cover the cases of atrocities committed against African Americans, burning them alive,
Right.
castrations, all of these things. Sometimes women, black women were lynched. And she would go and write about that, or what was called the Negro press. And her life was constantly threatened. Sometimes she would be carrying, I've been told, 2 and 3 pistols at the same time. She was a product of her time. She lectured with Marcus Garvey, and she knew W.B. Du Bois. She called her husband in public Mr. Barnett, Ida B. Wells Barnett.
Right.
But to show how liberated she was, she named her firstborn daughter Ida B. Wells Jr.
Okay.
No, this is Madame Toussaint Louverture. This is the wife of the famous Toussaint Louverture from Haiti. And this is an artist depiction of Madame Felicity and Jean-Jacques Dessalines. This is the first emperor and empress of Haiti.
Wow.
This is me up there, if you can believe it, and this is one of my great influences. This is the great John Henrik Clarke, and this was Dr. Clarke's wife, Sybil Williams Clarke. She's his widow now. I had to be 20 years ago. This is, of course, the world's greatest female athlete, Zarina.
Yep.
This is a photograph from a presentation I gave in Guyana, South America, about a year ago. It was a Women's Day program, and I gave a presentation kind of similar to what I'm doing today. And all these sisters wore their traditional African clothes. And you can see by their body language, they were not impressed. Look at this sister in the purple hair as if to say, brother, I came out here for that. But there were a lot of fun. So I thought this picture really captured a lot. And this sister, just the look on her face right now. Black people are funny. And Michelle.
Yeah.
I love Michelle Obama. I love her more than Barack. And I love the whole Obama family. Look at those girls and how they're growing up.
Oh, yeah.
And Barack keeps an eye on those young girls, believe me. I like to say if I had met Michelle before Barack Obama, he'd be giving this presentation and I'd be anyway, that's a beautiful word.
Yes.
Classy and intelligent and dignified, to me, a real queen.
What's the name of that movie you said had controversy now? Nina Simone?
I don't know what the name of that film is, but I know there's a film coming out about Nina Simone. This is a black politician in Brazil named Benedita da Silva. Brazil has the largest concentration of black folk in the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
You know, slavery was just abolished in Brazil in the 1880s, even
Right.
after the United States.
Right.
With a sister from Colombia and a feisty little sister from Elder in Ecuador. And you talking about feisty, this sister had a mouth that I was blushing, she said some things. Last thing she said as she walked away was F. George Bush. With a high-ranking official in Suriname, with these sisters in Honduras, a black business owner in Peru. I showed you this one of Mother Tanetta Muhammad. This is in Mexico, in Bolivia, a black business owner in Mexico. Oh, she had a restaurant, a seafood restaurant with fish to die for. But oh, when she gave you that bill, then you want to die. Colombia. These are recent pictures in Colombia. See, we don't see these folk on TV very often.
Right.
At a school I spoke at, and another one, and a mural from Colombia. Colombia has a 30% African population.
Right.
It's the largest concentration of black people in the Hispanic world in one country. Another university I spoke at, these are from Brazil. A lot of our people are hungry for this information. In fact, I'm rather surprised, pleasantly, that we got such a wonderful turnout. It's reassuring
Yes, sir.
that people really want to know about who we are and the great things we've done. And there's nothing wrong with it. Never let people tell you this was a long time ago. Forget about it. They don't forget about their history.
That's right. That's right.
So this is in Brazil. After a lecture I gave, I don't know if I've ever taken so many pictures. People lined up to take pictures. And these are orishas.
Yeah.
This is from Nigeria, now in Brazil. A lot of people were taken from Nigeria to Brazil, and this is in a state in Brazil called Bahia. And you can see those statues are in the water, and here I am. This was in November. And this is my attitude. The black man must love, honor, and respect the black woman.
Amen.
These are earrings that I photographed in a museum from Mali, made of gold. Alexander Dumas, a man of African heritage. His grandmother was Haitian. This is the person that wrote The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo and The Man in Iron Mask, those famous books. Who said, one for all and all for one. He said, your work may be finished, but your education is never completed. And he said, a man's mind is elevated to the status of the women with whom he associates. This is Dumas. And finally, let me just show you a few of these pieces sent to me on Facebook. Black love is black power. You see the little girl and the black heroes, and you might be able to identify some of this. Harriet, there's Madam C.J. Walker. I recognize, I think that's Angela Davis, Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells. The ones on top are hard to see. You may remember this, some of y'all who are older than me. Look at what we've gone through to have a decent life. And there's Marcus Garvey and Amy Jakes Garvey, a black doll. Maybe Mattel is finally getting it. And I don't know what this is a funny one to me. You can fill in the blank, but she's not happy. I don't know if that's jealousy or envy or what, or she's saying, look, I want to wash my hands too. And the sister's doing so. From Kenya, the people called the Fulani, a very distinct ethnic group in West Africa. I don't know where the sister's from. She's just gorgeous. The earlier she knows that she is fit to be a queen, the more she will value herself as she grows up. Charged with black beauty in the first degree. I love to see black women unapologetically in love with themselves. Black man and black woman, it is our duty to heal and uplift each other. The black woman is, and you fill in the blanks, I say a queen. Queens exude beauty while fully clothed. Be the change our girls need to see. I think Beyonce is one of the most beautiful women in the world, but I love to see her with some clothes on. I hate to see a black woman whose beauty is, whose sexuality is exploited. I think that troubles me. You can be beautiful and have all your clothes on. And I think that we need to be male and female role models for our children, because so much of what we do is driven by the media. Brother Kwabena has a campaign where he's trying to get these record companies, and better yet, radio stations, to stop playing songs with the N word in there and lyrics with the B word in there. There's nothing positive about that. And what I find is a lot of our people justifying the use of those terms. Just stop it. As Nancy Reagan used to say, just say no. Where's she gone? And now this is just for all the sisters in the audience. Okay, all the ladies here today. I post these on Facebook all the time. And this is one of the things I do. I have a studio in Los Angeles on my sister's property. And there's a patio that separates my studio and her house. And she grows these beautiful roses. And so every now and then I'll drag myself away from the computer and go outside and smell the roses and take a picture and post them to my sisters on Facebook to say, I love you, and I appreciate you, and I respect you, and I salute you. You are very special. I come from you, and there are none like you. And God bless you. Thank you for coming today. Yeah, we make time.
We got time for some questions, so just raise your hand, I'll get the mic to you.
The black people you saw in Cuba, do they speak just Spanish or English?
I haven't been to Cuba, but yeah, Cuba is a Spanish-speaking country, and I'm sure that most of them, well, I'm not going to say that. I started to say most of them are confined to Spanish. Most people out of the United States learn to speak more than one language. In fact, here's a joke. What do you call a person who speaks multiple languages?
An American.
No. Multilingual.
Oh, multilingual.
And what do you call a person who speaks two languages? You're bilingual. And then you got it. What do you call a person who speaks one language in America? Because most of us are not prepared or willing to learn other languages, and we find ourselves limited as a result of that. I saw your hand up and the mic went right to the back. We'll
That's
go
all
right.
right.
Come back.
That's all right. We'll get it.
I'd like to know, we know that the United States goes through great lengths to bleach everything and to convert everything as if, it was the white man and white people who kind of, created and did everything. But I was looking at those pictures that you had from places like Italy and Poland. Why is it they don't step up, since they know, where a lot of the original black, like the statues and stuff, what it is? How come they don't seem to put forth the effort to, promote our people?
Because they don't see those statues as ethnic. They see the blackness as symbolic. In fact, if you were to go to one of these churches, as I've done many times, I've seen about 10 of those in person. I think all but one of those were, maybe 2 of them were original pictures. And the ones that even weren't originals, I've been and seen them. But what they would say is that they're not black people, that their statues were originally white and they turned black over time, or that the statues or paintings got dirty, or it was set on fire, and it was, so on the one hand, they see the blackness, but they don't see it in ethnic terms. So that, I think, is why they are not more pro-black or active in terms of helping raise the standards of black people living around the world.
I have a dual question, I guess. Question. The name, could you name the most African city in Mexico and in Puerto Rico, and how do you feel about the Louis Gates series, and in terms of his series on South America, where it talks about the concerted effort by the Spaniards to distract or declassify the African side of all of their of all the people in South America.
I respect Henry Louis Gates as a scholar. I think he's done brilliant work, but I don't like him as a person.
Okay.
You know, we've been around each other, but we've never shaken hands. I remember he spoke at Spelman one day, and I spoke the next day. I got a bigger round of applause than he did, as a matter of fact, I'm happy to say. I think that Henry Louis Gates is a scholar who in some ways I envy. He's making $250,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
He's at Harvard. He doesn't have any problems getting grants. But Henry Louis Gates would also say that Africans are responsible for slavery, that there were no black people in ancient Egypt. I don't respect him as a man, you know, so I can't watch his stuff on TV. I'm not able to detach myself emotionally. I've heard about the series. Some people have said good things about it. I have heard bad things about it. To me, it's not enough to have the knowledge if you don't apply it to your life. I want to see a person who not only has the information, but embodies it. In our community, the African conscious community, we sometimes see people with African clothes and, you know, an ankh around their neck, and they have their hair wrapped and what have you. And I make fun of them a lot of times because those are surface things. What I'm interested in is a person who personifies it. People call themselves Christian. Now, Donald Trump is going around saying he's a Christian. But he's the most hateful person in America today. That, to me, is a contradiction. That's hypocrisy. And to me, that's how I see Henry Louis Gates. So I haven't seen it. I don't respect him as a person, but I respect the scholarship he's done.
And the two cities in the one city in Mexico and the one city, would you say, in Puerto Rico? And the reason why I raised this because me and my wife, we were at a Puerto Rican event, and when the woman started talking about the history of Puerto Rico, the room went silent.
What do you mean?
It went silent because people were shocked of their African heritage and the laws that even coming down from the Pope to stop the interracial marriages, and they went shocked when she said that we forget that we are African, because at one time Puerto Rico had more African than it had the Spanish side. So they kind of forgot the whole history of Puerto Rico.
There's a place outside of San Juan called Loíza. I haven't been there. I hope to go later this year. I don't know if there's it's an African community, I'm told. There is not necessarily a city, but a region in Mexico called Costa Chica. And Costa Chica is between, it's south of Acapulco. And there are dozens of small black communities there. You know, and the black people that I've met in Mexico have the lowest self-esteem of any group of black people I've met in the Western Hemisphere. But what you're saying about Puerto Rico is not uncommon. I mean, even today, if we were to ask a question, how many of us in this very room would say, I'm an African? You might say you're a black American. You might say you're an African American. I think of myself as an African in America. Okay, I don't mind being called an African American, but I don't take pride in my American heritage. African people were captured and enslaved and brought here. It's very hard for me to say I'm proud of being an American when I consider what America has done to us. The thousands of black people who were lynched and burned at the stake. The massive incarceration of African people right here today. The fact that I could walk outside and go to Chicago and be shot in the street with my hands in the air saying, don't shoot.
Right.
So when Michelle Obama said, and caught so much criticism for saying, I feel proud to be an American for the first time in my life, I can relate to that. And a lot of us can relate to that. That's reality. But even now in this room, I dare say, if I were to ask you to raise your hand if you see yourself as an African, I bet not even half the people in the room would raise their hand, because we're ashamed of Africa. Those African booty scratchers, those African jungle bunnies. Our image of Africa, for the most part, is of a little kid with snot running down his nose and flies over his eyes and an extended belly. When I come from Africa, people say, Runoko, did you stay in a hotel? Or did you stay in the bush?
Wow.
Did you see, did you have the internet?
Wow.
Did they have cars over there? We are so ignorant of Africa. We are taught to be anti-African. I know, because I was that way. When I was a youngster, if you had called me an African, we were going to fight. Because the African I saw was in the Tarzan movies.
Right, right.
Who would want to identify with that? And now if you say I'm not an African, we have a problem.
All right.
Because I've come full circle. Most of our people are not educated about Africa. We're ignorant about Africa. A lot of us say, thank God for slavery because it got us out of Africa. Don't call me an African. Don't call me anything but an African. Thank God for slavery because it got us out of Africa. We are taught to be ignorant about African heritage. And so why would you be surprised if the people in Puerto Rico are in denial, or the people of the Dominican Republic? Or a person in Jamaica would say, I'm not black, I'm brown.
Right.
Or a person in Brazil would say, I'm not black, I'm a Pardo.
Right.
Or a person in Panama would say, my ancestors may have come from Africa, but I'm Panamanian. Because we are taught to be anti-African. We are ashamed of Africa. What is the personification of beauty? If you're white, you're right.
Right.
If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're red, go ahead. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. In 1954, the year I was born, there was the famous black doll test.
Yep.
Kenneth Clarke from Panama, black psychologist, gave black children a choice. Do you want the black doll or the white doll? Almost all the children asked for the white doll. Why? Because the white doll is pretty and the black one is ugly. But that was 1954. Now the same test was repeated a couple of years ago, and the results were just the same, because we are taught that black is ugly. I want that good hair. I want that fair skin. Don't marry no black nigger because you'll have a black baby. And this idiot, Kanye West, will say Kim Kardashian is the most beautiful woman in the world. So why would you be shocked? Why should we be shocked that the people of Puerto Rico say, I ain't black, I ain't African? We are in denial. And it will take generations to come out of that. And some of us will just have to die and take those attitudes with them. Because that's just real. I think a lot of times we like to play games and put these things on the shelf and pretend that these realities are not real. Why do we shoot each other down in the street? Why would you, a black person, take the life of somebody who doesn't look like you cavalierly? Don't think twice about it. Because we are taught to hate who we are. And many of us would rather be anything other than an African. I've met black people darker than this external hard drive who would rather be called turds in the toilet than an African, because we're taught that way. And that attitude is in this church today. That is the way we are. It's in our families, it's in our homes.
Thank you.
In America, that's it.
I'd like to say that I think Trinity United Church of Christ Gary is an exception. Thanks to our pastor, with his knowledge, he has informed us that we do identify with being African, and thanks to him bringing scholars as yourself to this congregation to inform us. My questions are two. First of all, I would like to know, in your photos, it seems that on most of the artifacts, the noses were destroyed. Excuse me. I'd like to know how widespread that is in the world, in them trying to destroy the fact that these were blacks. And then my second question is, what do the blacks across the world think of African Americans?
Why would you ask that second question?
Because you've been in relationship with all of these people, and I'm wondering, are they seeing what's in the media? Or are they being informed by the people who come to visit to think differently about us?
All right, let me deal with the first issue. I think this anti-Africanism is real. I think that it's in this church and it's in every church. I respect my brother, would do anything for him. I'm honored to be here, and he's made great efforts. But those attitudes don't die because a pastor has been in the church for a few years. We are born with those attitudes.
Right.
And that attitude didn't start yesterday. And it's not gonna end tomorrow. It's like, in my opinion, it's like being a drug addict or an alcoholic. And you have to fight it every day, even if you're not drinking or putting that needle in your arm. And I believe that. I think I'm anti-African, because I'm taught to be that way. And it will take time. A lot of times we don't realize these things until we are actually confronted with it. Now, it's easy for me to go to Africa and stay in a 5-star hotel and have money in my pocket and a U.S. passport knowing I'm gonna leave soon.
Mm-hmm.
But the average life of an African is very hard. And I think that we need to come to grips with that. Okay? Now, in terms of how and the question about the noses. Now, the way you phrased that was very interesting. You didn't say, or you didn't ask, why are the noses missing? You said, why are the noses destroyed, with the assumption that somebody knocked those noses off. And that reflects a kind of a bias that I see us have. Now, I used to teach for a long time that these mean, nasty Europeans, these white people, came to Africa and knocked those noses off out of racial animus. And then I began to see noses knocked off or missing. See, I said the same thing. See how we're programmed? Noses, and language is powerful. The words we use are very powerful. That's why I use those analogies of good hair and fair skin. Because fair means good, but when we use the word fair skin, more often than not, it means light skin. And when we use the word good hair, we're usually talking about long, flowing European hair, even if we have to buy it.
Okay.
That's good hair for most of us. So language is very powerful. What I began to find is two things. First of all, there's no documentation for invaders coming to Africa and knocking those noses off. There's none. And number two, I began to see a lot of statues like that from Greece and Rome, purely European, with the noses knocked off too. Or the nose, see, there I'm going again. You see? That's what I mean, we have to look in the mirror. Yes, with the noses. And we're just talking. If I get a little excited, it's nothing personal. Please don't take it like that. But the nose is missing. I think it's a ritual associated with death in the ancient Mediterranean world. And we see it in Egypt very, very prominently, but I've also seen it with a lot of statues of people I know to be white from Europe. I've seen it on statues of, for example, Augustus Caesar, who we know was a European, but with the nose completely missing. The last question was, how do other Africans see us?
Yeah.
I would say they're dominated by the media. Many Africans have a negative image of African Americans as a result of that. Many Africans have told me they were warned not to mess with African Americans because we do drugs, we don't respect ourselves, we're thieves, we beat up our women. Because that's what you see on TV. And if they don't interact with you, and we don't interact with them, what other conclusions could you come to? But there are others who are just the opposite, who have a very, very favorable impression of African Americans. Some of that because they now see a black man in the White House and they see things that defy those stereotypes. But beyond that, I would say that the average African is just trying to make it from day to day. Life is hard for the average person on the continent of Africa. That's why so many of them are trying to leave. Because they have corrupt governments who don't allow them to benefit from the massive mineral resources of Africa. And so the average African is just trying to make it from day to day. He doesn't really think much about African Americans. That's not a preoccupation with him. The average African doesn't have running water. The average African is trying to send his kid to school so that they can have a life better than they had. The average African doesn't have a paved road. And so the idea that there's a kind of a fixation or even an interest in African Americans is, I don't think a lot of them are even thinking about that. I would rather ask what we think of Africans on the continent. And why would we think, many people ask me that a lot. And the assumption seems to be that we are so important, we're so significant, that other Africans would take the time to even give us a thought. All right.
It's, I want to thank you for coming out. That's, my family, they deal with African culture as far as Europe. And dealing with that is strengthened me. And then I see the connection as far as with Polero and Lucami, with other, other groups. And just by going through that and the strength, I find it hard that, we don't want to turn to that as far as being Africans, because that's my strength. That's what helps me fight the fight that I fight in the city of Gary. I mean, so it's a strengthening thing, and I just wanted to see, could you
So
expound?
you're asking me about traditional African religions.
Yes, and could you expound on, the Yoruba people and the connection with the Yoruba, Lucami, and Polero?
We were taken from Africa, we all know that. But we didn't leave Africa. In other words, I put it this way. We were taken from Africa, but we took Africa with us. And it manifests itself in so many ways without us being conscious of it. Like there's a sucking sound we make. They do that in Africa. Am I making sense? There's a kind of a sucking sound you make with your teeth. If you go to Africa and the Caribbean, they do the same thing. There's a rhythm in the way we walk. There's a way we talk that is purely African, even though we may speak English. Now, in my opinion, the religion that is practiced in African American churches, even in this one, I bet, is more African than it is American. I grew up, as I said, in the Church of God in Christ, and people would shout, and they'd speak in tongues, and that is not Billy Graham Christianity. Those are African religious traditions that they couldn't suppress, that are real. The word, we say amen. Amen comes from a male aspect of God in Egypt named Amen, which means the unseen one or the invisible one, or the hidden one. But amen is now an important term in Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, I know if I said a lot of these things, some of us would stop. Again, because we have this anti-African bias, and I'm speaking generally now. So I'm saying that Yoruba, or the Ifa, or whatever you call them, Santeria, Condomble, have African roots. But I would also say that the African American church also has strong African roots that practices African traditions, whether we understand it or not. I'll give another example. There's a practice that I've heard of that brothers do. They will pour, when a comrade, a gang member dies, they will have a libation ceremony. We do libation in Africa all the time. The problem is we've been taught to be ashamed of Africa, and we go into denial about Africa. And in my opinion, we need to get comfortable with our African selves. It would change everything. I'll give you a quick example. I started traveling to Africa in the 90s. I specifically went to Egypt. In 2000, I was invited by a governmental organization to come to Southern Africa and do a series of lectures. I was glad to go. I got there, and I did about 10 presentations in Namibia and Zimbabwe. General presentations on African and African American history. They went very well, and they were well received. Dignitaries, important people would come. Every time I gave a presentation, the same thing would happen. In the middle of the presentation, I'd get so emotional I'd almost lose it. And I might be talking about anything, and all at once I start talking about these nightmares that I had been having for years. And they're twofold. One is, I would be in my neighborhood, but I couldn't find my home. I'd go down the street, around the corner, down the boulevard, the alley, whatever. I know I live around here somewhere, but I couldn't find my door. I couldn't find my home. And I'd wake up feeling unsettled and nervous, as you can imagine, feeling homeless. Where do I live? Where do I come from? And then the other dream would be I would go visit my family. I was living in San Antonio at the time, and I would go back to visit my family in Los Angeles, where most of my family is, and they wouldn't want me to be there. They would make that very clear. They'd make me sleep on the floor. They wouldn't eat with me. They'd laugh at me. Okay? And I'd wake up sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning after one of these dreams and call my family and give them a piece of my mind. And they say, boy, you must be crazy, because we're so close. And I would say that in the course of these presentations. And I realized that those dreams had a much greater significance than I'd ever thought about. That because we were taken from home, in the back of our mind is this sense of, where do I belong? Where do I live? What is my home? We may never consciously articulate that, but it's right here. And the other dream was, because the other part of it was, we were separated from our families. So I think there's a fear of being separated again and having a sense of alienation. And I would tell people that in the middle of the presentation, and they would say to a person, thousands of people, Runoko, this is your home. And we are your family.
Yeah.
And you know, I never had those dreams anymore after that. I had to go through that kind of exorcism in Africa to realize the connection and how much we have suffered psychologically. We have suffered as a people. Do you know that in West Africa, the Dutch and the French had a dungeon for children? You had a dungeon for the men. You had a dungeon for the women. And it doesn't take much to imagine what happened to our sisters in those places. And the brother couldn't intervene. And then in the distance, you can hear your child calling you. Where are you? I'm hungry. I'm scared. Come get me. And you were helpless to intervene. This went on for hundreds of years till it became a way of life. We are crazy. We've been driven crazy. And that insanity is deep in our minds. We don't talk about it. We would like to think these things could have never happened. What human being could enslave a child? And I'm saying that these psychological disorders are right there in our mind. That's why we shoot each other down in the street. That's why we treat each other like we do. That's why we don't want to do business with each other. That's why a brother will say, I know I'm the victim of racism. 24/7. I'm racially profiled. I'm the last one to get a job, the first one to get fired, even the first one to get killed in a movie. And then when it comes to picking a mate, you don't see color. We're all the same. That's insanity. It defies logic. And that's what we're suffering from. And I think that history, knowledge of self, having these discussions, having these presentations, even though you may find some of it disagreeable, are absolutely essential. This pastor has gone out on a limb to invite me and people like me to come to this church. Everybody doesn't like that. But he believes that we have a mission that requires us to be unpopular sometimes, to do what is necessary to be done, even if it's not always palatable.
My question, I have a few questions. May I just limit the question? Because of
And
time.
I'll try to limit the answers. I seem to have gone off on a real tangent here.
You at home. Good stuff.
I feel
Good
it.
on.
And we just talking. Your turn.
I think my most important question is, I was taught in my anthropology class that the other races was a genetic mutation because of the environment.
I agree with that.
Okay. Also, is it true that Napoleon, did he take the sticks of dynamite? Is that true? And blow the nose off the stick?
No.
That's not true?
Not at all.
Okay.
First of all, there's only one race, and that's the human race.
Came out of Africa.
Yeah, we all come from Africa. We just went to different places, and we were transformed physically and psychologically. There ain't but one race, and that's the human race. We have far more in common than we have that separates us. I don't hate white people. You know, they are my brothers and sisters, whether I like it or not. They are the children of Africa. But we need to have an honest conversation also. So people are the product of their environment physically, but people are also the product of their environments psychologically. And Europe, those Africans went into Europe and got caught in that ice and were transformed psychologically and culturally. And we are dealing with those psychological and cultural issues today, a need to dominate. a sense that might makes right, a need to control, a sense that you are against me. All of those things come out of Europe. The idea that male is superior comes out of Europe. That is not African.
So you're saying because the harsh, cold environment,
It created a harsh, cold person.
and, yeah, because the kid grow crops, that sort of thing, so it created, okay.
For tens of thousands of years.
Create that culture. Okay.
Now go to prison, God forbid, and stay there for 20 years. You're gonna have to adapt in the joint. You won't be the same person that you were when you came out of there. You had to adapt. We are all adapting to environments.
Well, man, so
and if the environment is harsh, it'll make you harsh, or you're gonna perish.
In your opinion, can we ever fully recover from the from post-slave syndrome, you know, to the child slavery, Jim Crow? Can we ever really get to the point that I'm talking about psychologically? I'm not talking about, you know, in terms of the system, but can we ever, in terms of the way we treat each other, can we ever recover from that?
Of course we can, but I believe it would take generations,
Thank you.
and it would take a conscious effort. Yeah.
Hey, greetings, brother.
Hotep, my brother, good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. My question though was about when you showed on one of the slides when you were in the South Pacific and that cyclone came through. Because I know we couldn't get in touch with you for a few days. And how did you survive, and how did people treat you then? Because I mean, it was a trip.
I survived in Vanuatu in that hurricane because those people looked after me. Now the question was raised, how do other African populations or black populations see African Americans? Those sisters and brothers treated me like I was a family. They treated me differently than they treated the Australian and New Zealand tourists who were there. And if not for that, I might not have survived that storm. They fed me, they gave me water, they cleaned up my room when it was waterlogged. They treated me like I was one of them. And that was Pan-Africanism in practice. So yeah, it was an experience I'll never forget, 175-mile-per-hour winds. When you're in a hurricane of that magnitude, or a cyclone, same thing, it's like the sound of a fast-moving freight train. And on top of the freight train, the sound of the freight train is a high-pitched squeal like a little baby crying. In that storm, I saw my mother. That's how traumatic it was for me. But those people looked after me, and it was heart-rending. I mean, a lot of these people lost everything. Some people came to me the next day, people I talked to yesterday, and I saw them and they said, I lost everything. I don't have nothing. But they gave me what they did have, and I'll never forget that. Yeah. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, I bring glad tidings from a little Unitarian church in Hobart, Indiana.
Thank you.
And
Where is that?
Hobart is about 15 minutes east.
Okay.
And we are in process of having a lot of talks on racism.
Good.
And every Sunday in January, plus the first Sunday in February, we had 2-hour discussions on racism and how we as a congregation, as a white congregation, basically, I mean, we do have a little bit of diversity, how we can become well known as an anti-racist church. Not just non-racist, but anti-racist, which indicates action.
Okay.
So we're in process of doing that. We're still in process of doing that. And it's not easy, but it's something that everybody is committed to. The whole congregation is committed to that.
I salute you.
So we also are wanting to bring, once we get well into the process where we're able to be a source of action, we're pulling more people in. So we're having community forums where we're asking not just political leaders, but religious leaders, educators of all ethnicity to come and speak and work on this issue, work on becoming anti-racist. Do you have any advice that I could take home?
No, I think you have to continue to educate yourself. I admire you for coming out today. You know, I realize that some of the things that I've said might not be the most pleasant thing in the world, but you have the courage to sit there and listen. You've been respectful and polite, and I appreciate that. I can't ask for any more. I would just say that it's important that you continue to educate yourself about these things. Know thyself is the maxim. And if you ever feel so inclined, invite me to come. I'll give a presentation.
Well, I would love for you to come. As a matter of fact, I've seen all of your videos 3 times on our white people inherently evil.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I would, yeah, well. And you know the conclusion I came to is that they are not. I don't think anybody's inherently anything. I think we are the products of our environment, and we learn behavior. And if I didn't believe that, I'd probably give up. Okay. So we need to educate ourselves, and I encourage you to keep coming and get as much information as you can and share it with your colleagues and members of your church. Thank you. Any last questions? No?
Oh,
I see one more.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As you try to carry on tradition, who do you have, or do you have someone under you to continue this education and pass it on? I know you did the foreword for a friend of mine, Dr. Supreme Understanding, The World is Black. He does a lot of work, but I think it's important that, you know, that we have people who pass things down to from generation to generation to keep the education up of knowledge of self, of the history of our people. And then, you know, especially your travels, world travels, is able to spread that knowledge. And do you have any type of person that's, you know, under you that you're trying to, I know you're probably a daughter, to continue on this tradition, continue this education that you do from across the world?
Speaking of daughters, is that your daughter?
Yes, sir.
Right on, my brother. That's wonderful. Let's give this man a round of applause.
All right.
I'm trying, it's not easy. I would say that in this room today, we have one person I'd like to look upon like that, and that's Brother Scobie now. Now, I don't know if he feels like that, but I've known him for a while. He's brilliant. He's an activist. He's consistent. And if I were to think of somebody as like a successor or somebody that, I can't call him a mentor because, I can't call him a mentee because he was doing this work long before I met him. But people like that, to me, are worth their weight in gold. You know, he invites me out. He's the first time I ever came to Gary, he hooked up a lecture for me. Hooked up a big lecture for me at Purdue University last year. So I do have a few people like that, but not enough and not consistently. And what you said is absolutely correct. We must prepare future generations, you know, to do this work. All of us have limited time on this earth. I'd like to think I have a lot more, but nevertheless, it's always important to prepare and pass the information along so that other generations don't have to start from scratch. And so your comments just reinforce that in me. I am making an effort. Anybody here, I did bring a number of my business cards, my phone number, my email address, my website is all here. And take one and be in contact. It's kind of up to us. A lot of times I do these presentations or I post something on Facebook where I'm very active, and a person would say, they lied to us. They didn't tell us the truth, and all that's true. But at the end of the day, whose job is it for us to know our history but us? You can't expect anybody to tell your story for you. We have to tell it ourselves. There's an African proverb that goes, until the lion has a historian, the hunter will always be a hero. People tend to tell history from their perspective. And again, I would salute Pastor here. Now he's brought me here, I think this is at least the 4th time, 4 or 5 times. A lot of times, there haven't been many people here. And he'll call me next year and say, Runoko, you coming? That takes courage. That takes commitment. And that takes vision. And we need more men like this. We need more sisters and brothers like this. And we have to get behind them. We've already already had one man who died for our sins. We don't want another one.
Right.
We all have a job to do. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. Dr. Martin Luther King, or maybe it was Malcolm, or maybe it was both of them, said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. What do we stand for? Are we willing to take a position? Are we willing to sacrifice? Imagine the sacrifices. You know, think about Dr. King and being in that Birmingham jail. Malcolm with his life threatened. You know, Marcus Garvey, Harriet Tubman, I know they were afraid. I know that they were human beings. They had to be.
Right.
I know they felt challenged. I know sometimes they may have even lost their confidence. That doesn't make them less great. To me, it makes them more great because they kept going. And I think that this brother is in that tradition.
Yes.
And he needs and deserves our support. So we don't have to look abroad. We don't have to look afar. We don't have to look at what the Africans are doing. We can look at what we're doing right here in Gary. And I think that we have a great leader amongst us. I respect him, and he needs our support every day, all day.
Come on and put your hands together for an incredible scholar, a good brother.
The information, books are here, DVDs are here, and certainly you can come pick up a business card.
Yeah, come on, we're gonna end like this in the words of the great Marcus Garvey, of you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will. Come on and check out the brother's product, shake the brother's hand, encourage him now, come on, encourage him.
All right.
Encourage him, he has presented for us for 2 hours, come on and encourage his spirit.